Welcome to the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County's experimental online educational series. We're doing this because currently all of our education programming is shut down because of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. Now, there'll be nothing fancy about this video. It'll be like the PowerPoint presentation you would see if you attended in person, except the audio is pre-recorded. We're hoping that my personality and information will make up for the lack of seeing me in person. Please note there's a pause at the beginning and end of each slide to allow the PowerPoint audio to transition without hiccups. We're grateful to all our sponsors, but this week we're especially grateful to Brunk Auctions, world-class consignments and exceptional results. But I'm being rude. Who am I? I'm James Vaughn. I'm a member of the Preservation Society and one of the owners of Chiles House. We're the guys who got the house on the National Register of Historic Places. I'm a history buff, and I also tend to talk fast. But the nice thing about video is you can always pause and go back, or get more information about Chiles Avenue and the history of Kenilworth at our website, chiles-house.com. If you saw our previous video, Crime and Punishment on Chiles Avenue, you can skip ahead a few slides. For those of you who are new, a bit of background on Jake and Leah Chiles, Chiles Avenue, and the town of Kenilworth. James Madison Chiles, or Jake as he was known, was the start of it all. He first came to Asheville in 1908 and fell in love with the town and Kenilworth Inn, and he became the first mayor of the town of Kenilworth in 1915. Born in South Carolina, he was involved in the furniture business, which he sold when he moved here. That's where he met and married Leah Arcouet Chiles. Leah was the daughter of Casimir Arcouet, a sculptor who worked on the hands of the Statue of Liberty. She was a true partner in the business, co-owning many of the properties they developed and sold together. She was also the first woman elected mayor of a town in western North Carolina in 1928, and she would serve as its last mayor as well when the town of Kenilworth was annexed by Asheville in 1929. Now what about that Kenilworth Inn? Well, it was a grand luxury inn that burned down in 1909. It didn't have enough insurance, so most believed it would never be rebuilt. But Jake rescued it and brought it back like a phoenix from the ashes. Unfortunately, just in time for the military to take it as a military hospital. Jake reacquired the inn and made a success of it. Jake wanted a development like that around the Grove Park Inn, but more affordable, and it was said that Jake and Leah helped to finance some of the homes, which caused problems, of course, when the first wave of the Depression hit Asheville in 1927. Pictured here is the town hall, with Leah Chiles and the town clerk, Ada Ward. The town hall, set up in a home, is now a private residence again today. The title of our series is It Happened on Chiles Avenue. Why Chiles Avenue? Well, because it's a microcosm of what was happening through the 20th century and into modern day, not just in the town of Kenilworth, but in broader terms what was happening in Asheville as well. Pictured here is an aerial view of Chiles Avenue from the 1920s. The arrow shows you Chiles House, and the green area just above it is the park renamed in Leah Chiles' honor in 2018. Chiles Avenue was a who's who of society and politics in the 1920s, and this video series tells the stories of the homes as well as their owners. Jake's vision of Chiles Avenue is demonstrated by this ad, which notes that it was most suitable for the most pretentious homes. Apparently pretentious had a different connotation back then. The Town Council of Kenilworth designated Chiles Avenue as a major thoroughfare. But if you've ever driven down it today, there's barely enough room for one car when people park on the street. Our topic this time is the remarkable Ronald Greene. In my original presentation, he'd have gotten a nod to being the architect of our home and his house being across the street. But breaking out side topics as we are with this video series allows me to do him real justice, hopefully. Greene had a typical upbringing and training for an architect, but he certainly made a running jump at his career. He was born in 1891, and per my research, his first project with Carolina Wood Products was in Asheville in 1910, which would have made him 19 years old. He came back in 1916 at age 25 to rebuild the Kenilworth Inn and a few other projects before seeming to take a job with the United States Steel Corp as chief architect, according to one source, taking him to Duluth, where he boomeranged back to Asheville in 1922 when his career really began to take off. One of the more interesting non-architectural projects he involved himself in was to join the board of the Asheville Motion Picture Corporation, which ran a series of ads like this one to attract investors. It appears to have gone nowhere,
But Greene did get to dabble in the movie business when he designed the Roxy Theater in Old Fort. Sadly, it burned down only 16 years later. Remember, the nice thing about these videos is you can pause and read the articles, all of which I found via newspapers.com. Ronald Greene had your typical American family of 2.5 children. He married his wife Louise in 1918. He presumably met her in Asheville as her parents lived in Montford at the time. His first child, Catherine, was featured in a 1926 article about Greene's home. At 5 years old, she was described as a chip off the old block as she constructed skyscrapers like her father's Jackson building out of blocks. We don't know much about her sister Eleanor except she got married in 1950 and died young at age 50 in 1981. His son Nelson was featured in an article having won an archery contest, an interest he shared with his father. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Children were farther in his future. In our timeline, Greene is in Duluth, Minnesota with United States Steel. According to an article, he was responsible for designing a variety of buildings, but his most interesting project was helping to move the town of Hibbing. The local mining company discovered the town sat on a valuable deposit, and the town agreed to be moved 2 miles away. Buildings, like the Colonial Hotel, were put up on rollers and hauled by tractors and horses. Men went on ahead holding up wires or moving obstacles. If Hibbing sounds vaguely familiar, perhaps because you know its most famous hometown boy pictured here. Need another hint? It said this song was written about the town. Give up? It's Bob Dylan. Ronald Greene didn't just build things, he shot things, mostly birds. He was an avid hunter, helping to organize a local game bird association. He organized a skeet shooting tournament that drew people from all over. Many people thought it couldn't be done. This article states Greene took up skeet shooting to help erase the memories of the Great Depression. But in later years, he took to shooting birds with his camera. He was an avid photographer who won state and local awards. The Photographers Association of America selected his photo Birds in Flight for display at their 1957 convention. Let's talk about his architecture in more detail. What was his style? It was the fact that he was so eclectic and designed buildings in so many styles that one source claimed he never got the recognition as, say, a Richard Sharp Smith did, because it was harder to look at a building and declare emphatically, that's a Greene building. His work was described as being everything from capturing the panache of Asheville's spirit to being called an agreeably grotesque amalgam by Douglas Swain in his book Cabins and Castles. Can you guess which building he was referring to? No, I wasn't referring to Chiles' house, but let's talk about why I refer to him as the architect of Chiles Avenue. Well, because of course he designed our home. He must have liked the neighborhood well enough, though, to design his own home across the street. While the exteriors couldn't be any more different, they share a few interior features that helped us determine, for example, that the plain wooden doors in Chiles' house were indeed probably original.
The interior of Chiles' house is fairly intact and original to what Greene and Chiles first built in 1922. Some features that were falling into disrepair have been restored. An article from the period noted Chiles wanted the most modern home for the time, so in the library you see inset lighting all along the top of the room, which is still working today. Leah's famous pink bathroom is one of the most intact. It still has the radiator and the coal-burning fireplace you see at right. The arrow indicates approximately where the mother-of-pearl button is still set into the wall. It rang a bell down in the kitchen to let one of the servants know Leah needed something. The lighting fixture is new to upgrade the home a bit and reflect an updated version of the Hollywood Regency style that was popular in that era and the style of home like Chiles' house. Think Sunset Boulevard.
Ronald Greene's own home across the street warranted a full-page spread in 1926 in the Sunday Citizen, on the front page no less of the real estate section. Besides the large photos, some of which you see here, there was a detailed article written in the form of a chatty letter by a woman to another friend describing the neighborhood, including Chiles' house, and the interior and exterior of the home as it was at the time. That's the article where we heard about Catherine Greene building the Jackson building out of blocks. As you can see from some of these more recent photos, the home looks much the same on the outside and in many of the interior rooms. I included a picture of the doorframe and doors, which are similar to those in Chiles' house, as we mentioned earlier.
Chiles Avenue isn't the only place to find Greene's projects, of course. There are many right in Kenilworth from the period when it was its own town before being annexed in 1929. The most famous, of course, is the Kenilworth Inn, designed when he was 24 years old. A whole presentation could be done on the inn, so I will pass quickly by because there's lots of green ground to cover. Let's start right next door to the Kenilworth Inn for our first pair of unique homes. This nearly identical twin pair of homes was designed by Greene and built by Jake and Leah. One source described them as Kenilworth Inn cottages. I'm not sure if that means they were intended as rental properties associated with the inn or just in proximity to it. The first was built in 1917, and sources say the second wasn't built until 1923. The second was built in mirror image to the first, so maybe Jake simply recycled the first Greene design? They're unique to Asheville and probably Western North Carolina because of their strong Chinese influence, as the description here reads. The bottom left photo shows the interior of the second cottage from a recent real estate listing. I don't know to what extent the interior still looks the same as when originally built. The third house is one I was kind of surprised to discover. It's right in our own neighborhood. It was built on Lakewood Avenue in 1936. I saw in a Miller phone directory at the time that Greene and his family had lived a short while down near the corner of Lakewood and Kenilworth Road. He'd moved out of his Chiles Avenue house and had rented it. He appears to have moved back in for a short time again before moving away for good. Now, this home was put up for auction after the death of the elderly resident. I went in for the real estate sale a few years back, not knowing its provenance, and so I got to see it in its original form. I admit I found it a bit awkward in layout, and I thought if I owned it, I'd tear out several of the interior walls and open it up, and that's exactly what the buyers did. I suspect it means that it takes it out of the running for a slot on the National Register of Historic Places, but then it might not have been significant enough before. It does show the importance of being aware of all the landmarks in our community so they can be put on a watch list for preservation purposes. Let's make this interesting. I've displayed 5 photos of landmarks in Asheville. Can you guess which 4 of the 5 are Ronald Greene properties? They are roughly from left to right: the Jackson Building, the Westall Building, the original Women's Club of Asheville, Trinity Episcopal Church, and the Asheville Municipal Building at 100 Court. Make your pick now while we start to eliminate the choices. Let's start with the easy one. Everyone knows Greene designed the Jackson Building, built in 1923 for L.B. Jackson, who was a 28-year-old ambitious real estate developer. He's pictured here. The Gothic Revival building was an immediate success on opening, praised by many for Greene's adaptation of the neo-Gothic style. As you move up the building, it gets more elaborate with grotesques and elaborate detailing. For a short period, it was the tallest building in North Carolina, but only for a matter of months perhaps. But it still holds the Guinness World Record for the tallest building in the smallest space. LB wanted something big and splashy to help draw attention to his business and properties, as you can see from this simple sign pictured here for him. His company was involved in such landmarks as the Flatiron Building and the Grove Arcade. As young as age 8, he set up a stand selling peanuts in front of his father's store at the train depot. It became successful enough, he generously gave his brother a franchise in another location. Ronald Greene was initially to have an office studio on the 13th floor, and Greene is said to have designed that space with that in mind. However, Jackson reneged on that deal and Greene sued him. The case ended up before the North Carolina State Supreme Court, which ruled in Greene's favor. I don't know how it was settled, but Greene isn't listed as having a space in the building until the late 1940s. The Jackson Building puts Asheville on the architectural map. Tied, literally, to the Jackson Building is the Westall Building next door. The lot was so narrow it was forced to share elevators with the Jackson Building. The Spanish Romanesque building was designed for William H. Westall, lumber magnate and prominent builder. The Jackson Building was built on the site of Thomas Wolfe's father's monument shop, but Westall was the brother to Thomas's mother, Julia Westall Wolfe. The 8-story Westall is more colorful than the Jackson Building. Perhaps that reflected the more colorful personality of Westall. He was also a pilot who conducted aerial bombing raids on Asheville, dropping leaflets to promote the idea of an airport in Asheville. And yes, this was designed by Ronald Greene. The Asheville Municipal Building sits right across the side street from the Jackson Building. Is it one of Greene's, though? Yes, it is.
It was built in 1925 and combines many architectural elements. The two-story brick-faced building has limestone trim and a rusticated first floor with neoclassical detailing. It contains the police and fire departments. Originally, it also contained an elaborate city market, one of the finest in the South, according to local reports. As designed by Ronald Greene, the spare lines of the building were relieved by carved panels and urns, but only a few of those on the side elevations were executed. The side facing Park Square has 3 pairs of paired Tuscan columns. On the side facing Market, there is a fanciful Roman portico. The Roman arch entrance displays an intricate overdoor composed of the numbers 1925 in bas relief, noting the entrance to that market. We're down to 2, Trinity Episcopal Church and the Women's Club. Which one is the Greene building? The Asheville Women's Club. A 1922 article noted that a women's group had contracted with Ronald Greene to build them a club. In fact, the article included the design shown here on the left. Over the next few years, numerous articles noted the ongoing efforts to raise the necessary funds, and in 1926, the building you see at right was finally formally opened in a different location and with an altered final plan in this Georgian style. It was initially slated for the corner of Church and Ravenscroft, I understand. Most of you will recognize it by the name we use today to describe it, the Pollock School at 1 Sunset Terrace. We had the pleasure of touring this building when the Preservation Society held a reception there for members. Membership has its privileges, and if you aren't a member already, be sure to join soon. So, no, Trinity Church, built in 1913, is not a Ronald Greene building. Let's talk clubs. Did you know that in 1922, Ronald Greene was contracted to do a remodel of the Young Men's Institute, the YMI Club? He added the swimming pool. The YMI was built by Vanderbilt for his black workers for their benefit. Compare that to the Malvern Hills Country Club, a whites-only clubhouse for a community built around some sulfur springs. You can see both the original design for the country club and a photo of the finished product. Note that the wings were swapped. Today, I understand that only the central dome survives, and Malvern Hills makes very clear on their website today that they are inclusive of all races, religions, and sexual orientations. Ronald Greene was most prolific when it came to schools and was very proud of his work on them. Even after moving to Gastonia in 1952, he kept tabs on what was said about him and his work. After an article noted cost overruns on schools, Greene responded in a letter to the editor, which generated further coverage in defense of his ability to keep to a budget. You can see several other examples of educational buildings done by Greene here, reflecting the wide variety of architectural styles. Franklin High has been changed the most from this international style influenced work of art you see pictured here to something much more traditional and bland. Today, if you're in front of the school, which is not pictured here, if you squint at the front entrance, you can see the clean original lines of his original design and construction. You may remember this school from a few years back when a student was arrested for having a hit list on fellow students. We know it was the loss of the Kenilworth Inn by fire that led to Ronald Greene's design to rebuild it, but it was another greater tragedy that led to what Ronald Greene always felt was his best work. In November 1917, the Catholic Hill School, the first school built for African American children, caught fire when the school's furnace malfunctioned. 8 children died that day, one of the highest losses of life by fire in Asheville history. It wasn't until 1921 that we find our first article noting that Greene had been hired to be the architect for the school at a cost of $115,000 for rebuilding. He furnished plans, but controversy erupted when city officials challenged his plans as not being sufficiently fireproof. News articles hint there were private agendas at work as attempts were made to take Greene off the job, with back and forth in local media defending and criticizing him. But ultimately, the new school was opened in 1923. Stevens Lee High School, the castle on the hill, built in the Gothic academic style. It was named after George Henry Stevens, the first black principal of a school in Asheville, the Catholic Hill School, and the well-respected teacher and wife of the school's second black principal, Hester Lee, pictured here with her husband. Hester Ford Lee was one of the 2 black women who faced the daunting task of teaching 85 first-grade students, most likely crowded into one large room, when Beaumont Street School opened in 1888. She would die 2 months after the honor of seeing the new school named for her. The school was closed in 1965 after integration, and all but the school's gym was torn down in 1975. It's now an official local landmark that houses a community center and the headquarters museum of the Stevens Lee Alumni Association. Ronald Greene said it was one of his favorite projects. Since we're in an academic mode, it's time for a pop quiz. Can you name the 2 academic institutions by Greene that are on the National Register of Historic Places? Major extra credit if you first thought of the Buncombe County Training School for Boys. Built in 1928 in a feudal castle style, or what others call a loose interpretation of Tudor Revival architecture, this school was intended for boys between ages 10 and 16 whose parents had died or deserted them or just couldn't care for them anymore. Can you imagine being dropped off here on a dark and stormy night? The article clip you see here makes clear this was not a school for juvenile delinquents. The accompanying photograph notes they even had 2 dogs, one pictured here and one who was on the injured list having hurt his leg in an earlier scrimmage. Today, it houses the county's Emergency Operations Center. The second school in the National Register is the classically designed Greek temple, the Claxton School. It was built to accommodate the growing population of Asheville. The 3-story neoclassical school building was constructed of hollow clay tile. It's faced with cast concrete stone veneer. The original 2-story auditorium is located at the rear of the building. It was named in honor of Philander Claxton. Philander. So many jokes, but this is school, so I'll behave. Philander Claxton was Commissioner of Education for 3 presidents. That was the forerunner to the position of Secretary of Education today. He served under Presidents Taft, Wilson, and Harding. Clearly, fire was a concern at all new schools, and Greene was challenged again on his designs to make sure school buildings were safe from fire. Let's change it up and play another game. Name that style. Below are 5 buildings and 5 different architectural styles. Can you match the building with the style? Perhaps if we gave you enough time. Or you can pause the video and make a stab. For the rest, let's move on and reveal the answers. The first building, and the oldest of the bunch, is the Carolina Apartment Building, designed by Greene for the Carolina Wood Products Company that opened in 1918. It was considered the first modern apartment building in Asheville and designed in the Colonial Revival Georgian style. It has brick-jack arches with keystones above windows, columns, and classical balustrades on 2-story porches. Many thanks again to Dale Slusser for helping me to identify these. It still exists today, but has been modified to accommodate more apartments. Next up, the Jefferson Apartment Building, shown in an original photo and recently. Built on a horseshoe plan with its courtyard opening to the south onto East Chestnut Street, the Jefferson is ornamented in a rich Spanish Romanesque mode. The center bays of wings fronting on Chestnut feature a central Tuscan pilaster on each floor between round arched windows with stuccoed spandrels. Raised brick quoins articulate the end bays on each wing. An arched corbel table and heavily bracketed tile pents form the building's cornice. I wish I noted who wrote that description so I could acknowledge them properly. Clearly, I was reading it. In case you hadn't recognized it, we're looking at the other commercial housing works of Ronald Greene. And now we're at the Monroe Apartments of 1927. This is our Flemish blonde brick with Georgian Revival decorative features building. Cabins and Castles further describes it as, quote, having a slightly projecting pedimented central pavilion with limestone quoining. The central entrance composition features a round arched doorway with fanlight within a small Corinthian portico. The building is divided into 3 parts by a limestone water table at the first floor level and a limestone cornice above the 3rd floor windows. Fortunately, we passed the education building part, so there won't be any further tests on this. The Longchamps. Some Preservation Society members had the rare privilege of touring several of these apartments at a members-only event in 2019. It's located at 185 Macon on the approach to the Grove Park Inn. This building is the one Cabins and Castles calls, quote, an agreeably grotesque amalgam of chateauesque and Tudoresque architectural styles. Apparently shade must be an architectural term. Now, please remember, I'm an amateur historian, not an amateur architect, so I can only parrot the things I've read. All errors are mine. I've attached some interior pictures I was able to glean from online real estate ads to give you some sense of what we saw. The upper left corner shows a typical interior patio that we saw in several of the units that we had access to. One of them had a beautifully framed view of the Jackson building, which really made a nice connection to Greene's other work. Other units look out towards another of Greene's works, which we'll explore in a moment. Whether by original design or evolution over the years, while all of them are parts of the same building, most apartments were still very different from one another, from streamlined to the ornate, single level to multi-level. If we ever downsize to a condo-sized home, I'll start looking here first. In 1940, Greene designed this rustic mountain inn for a Chicago travel agent to accommodate passengers on his railroad and bus tours of the mountains. It was one of the last of a series of architecturally significant mountain lodges built in the region in the first half of the 20th century, and for that reason, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1993. Pairing this building with Longchamps, it really gives you a perspective on the wide sweep of architectural styles, and that's what makes it so hard to pigeonhole Ronald Greene for a particular style. Let's go back to Asheville, to the downtown historic commercial district to be specific, and another pop quiz. How many Ronald Greene commercial buildings were there in downtown? All but one of them are still recognizable even in their current usage. The answer? 5. Let's start in 1922 with the National Bank of Commerce. You can see a rendering of the bank and an actual photo of it completed. It was restored back closer to its original design after some modifications made over the years. At the time, a group of businessmen got together to form the bank, and Junius Adams was named president of the bank. Judge Adams was an important legal counselor to the Vanderbilts, but he was also Jake and Leah Chiles' attorney as well. Fun fact, we hired his grandson, Gus Adams, to do the restoration work in 2018 that won Adams and Chiles House a Griffin Award for renovation. Gus Adams is a business member of the Preservation Society. In 1929, Lou Pollock announced that he had hired Ronald Greene to design him a set of 3 new stores on Haywood, one for Pollock shoes, one for Cinderella slippers, a company he had acquired, and a third for another tenant. Lou Pollock, a prominent member of the Asheville Jewish community, was known for his annual Christmas shoe giveaway to needy children in Asheville. The local Jewish cemetery was renamed after him in honor of his philanthropy and service. I'm told it was the first time a cemetery had been named to commemorate a living man. His home still stands across the street from Chiles House, and his store can still be recognized by the Pollock logo above the awnings of what is now a downtown tourist office, sandwiched between the Woolworths and the 1937 Bon Marché store. Speaking of the 1937 Bon Marché store, that's another Ronald Greene commercial building. This Art Deco style building remains recognizable as the home today of the Earth Guild store. In 1935, W.C. Shuey of Shell Oil, pictured here, announced that 4 new gas stations designed by Ronald Greene would be built with exteriors of architectural terracotta. We can see from the 4 locations that only one remains. It opened in 1939, and it now houses Spiver Green Jewelers. Although I confess I got excited when I realized that the Hop ice cream store, which is now the YOLO frozen yogurt store, is in the same location as one listed, and it was converted from a gas station. It even bears a striking resemblance to the stores pictured here. Sadly, additional research found that that was a different gas station, and the addresses for the Shuey gas station by Greene is now the site of a modern convenience store. So much for visions of rediscovering a lost Greene masterpiece. Ronald Greene returned to Haywood in 1946, designing a new store for Winter's Department Store across the street from his Bon Marché building. They were known for their elaborate window displays, it seems. I like to show plans and actuals whenever I can so you can see where reality had to bend to design. I found that some interior photos of Winters exist in the Ball photograph collection, and I'd love to see those someday. Harry Winter was quite a progressive. He replaced segregated water fountains and displayed a black mannequin. When the Vanderbilt Hotel refused to allow black attendees of a Jewish-Christian interfaith conference, Winter pulled the event from their hotel in protest. I'm not exactly sure, but I believe where the Winter department store entrance was is now roughly where the chocolate fetish store is, but I could be wrong, and I couldn't justify leaving home during the stay-in-place order to work it out exactly. Trivia time. Which National Register of Historic Places building in Biltmore Village is a Ronald Greene building? The answer is the McKeechee Building, or McGehee as it's actually listed in the official listing. Noted for its Sullivan-esque ornamentation, it's currently the home of Bellagio. Throughout its history, it was said to have housed many offices upstairs, including offices for the Biltmore Company. Let's look more at the homes Greene designed. Let's pick up in the 1920s when he returned. 1922, Chiles House was under construction, and across Biltmore Avenue in the St. Dunstan's neighborhood, builder Hobart Alport was building his own home from Greene's plans. Located on the horseshoe with beautiful views, it's located right across from a stone wall said to be built by John Roebling, grandson of the builder of the Brooklyn Bridge, who owned much of the property in St. Dunstan's. Roebling's first cousin, Washington Augustus Roebling, was probably more well known, but that's because he died in the sinking of the Titanic. Hobart Alport's wife was the real civic leader in the family. She served as president of the PTA and the Travelers Club, and you can see her featured here in a news blurb about the arrival of the new DeSoto. In fact, I think that picture was taken in front of the Alport house. Back to Macon Avenue across from Longchamps in the 1920s to the Bynum House. Much has been written and said about this amazing home. I won't rest here, but if you want to see a great YouTube video, just Google Curtis Bynum House, Asheville, and watch the video by Craig Klein that pops up. The Preservation Society exists to draw attention to endangered properties just like this one. Let's stay in Grove Park and visit the home of Dr. Lewis Mueller Griffith. This green home was built for the Griffiths and was their home until their deaths. It was sold in the 70s and it's on only its second owner. As a result of this, it was maintained in near exact condition and was recently named an Asheville local landmark by the City Council during the drafting of this video. Because of that, I was able to get a hold of a few of the details. The fireplace mantel was designed by Greene and built to his specifications. Note the door trim that we saw in Greene's own home, which, along with the baseboard caps indicated, are the same as those found in Chiles' house. I don't know if those caps were common back then, but when we had to restore them, it took special custom work to make a machine to recreate them, as we like to say. It's a real treat to see that Greene's original blueprints for this house still exist. The 1920s was a boom year for architecture in Asheville, and Ronald Greene was at the heart of it. Are you familiar with Faraway House? You remember the Preservation Society marketing this house a few years back. Several volunteers also helped to clean it out to prepare it for sale. In my research, I came across this ad promoting the sale of Faraway, noting that it was in the classic design of Ronald Greene. But did he do this one? It's possible. Even when we got a chance to tour it ourselves before I found this ad, we had noted that the doorways and window frames were the same Ronald Greene style. Now, we have 4 completely different exterior styles, but this detail seems to be the closest thing we have to a Greene signature style. Gay Greene and his wife Effie Reeves had the last Ronald Greene house I could find before we started to come out of the Depression in the latter 1930s. Effie would live in the house from 1929 until her death shortly after she turned 100 in 1969. Her husband Gay was a big believer in Asheville and its future, and was one of the largest holders of individual properties and portions of properties at the time of his death in 1951. He was buried in the Riverside Cemetery, which was near his home. The Depression hit Asheville hard, and so it was notable when homes were being built. At least 2 news articles noted a number of homes being designed by Ronald Greene, including those you see listed here. None of these listed can be verified as still standing, or they can't be seen on Google Earth because of vegetation. And as I noted earlier, it wouldn't exactly be considered an essential service for me to drive around these neighborhoods to try and take pictures today during the pandemic. But let's skim quickly through some of them that do exist, like this 1936 home for Charles M. Britt and his wife in 1936 built on Kimberly. It was going to be built for $10,000, but as other research has shown and modern experience tells us, it was probably much more than that when it was done. Nearby on the same street, Ethan Kuhn may have built this house, but his wife, an avid gardener, made the most of it.
With its beautiful setting and unobstructed views of the Grove Park Inn, it provided an amazing setting to develop beautiful gardens. She was president of the Asheville Garden Club and involved in many charities for children that involved gardening. This is one of at least 2 homes built on Vanderbilt Road in Biltmore Forest from Ronald Greene's designs. This is the 1937 home for William Bidding Jr., who had his own chapel museum near his property, where he built a chapel for the visiting Archbishop of Manila and Primate of the Philippines in 1938. This is my favorite of all the houses I found in my research. A simple 3-sentence blurb set me on the track, and I almost ignored it. But to my delight, I discovered the talking house. Radio loudspeakers were cleverly concealed in various pieces of equipment to describe these features and furnishings and the phase of building in each room. Perlman's Railroad Salvage, whose family lived in Chiles' house at this time, provided the electric equipment, the furniture, and the appliances. It said several thousand people came through the house, and I think it still stands today, although probably with more modern devices like Alexa to do the talking. Asheville may not have seen a Greene home again until 1936, but in Durham, North Carolina in 1935, Ronald Greene designed his masterpiece, the Howard Gamble House, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built in the international style first developed in the 1920s and 30s. It's characterized by an emphasis on volume over mass, the use of lightweight, mass-produced industrial materials, rejection of all ornament and color, repetitive modular forms, and the use of flat surfaces, typically alternating with areas of glass. Let's take a closer look. The photo at the far left shows an unfortunate exterior renovation involving permastone, which was later removed. The house was abandoned completely in the 1970s. The other photos here show the interior taken by Endangered Durham. The house was fortunately bought and restored with the home next door to it that belonged to Gamble's in-laws, and both were added to the National Register in 1978. Asheville has its own Ronald Greene International-style home in Kenilworth. It was designed by Greene and built for Annie J. Reed in 1948. I can't find much about Reed except for large donations made by her family to Lee's McRae College. A dorm was donated in her father's memory, and then a woman's dormitory in her mother's name as well. And there were annual donations of books made to the library. We do know she shared the house with at least one other adult from an ad for a cook housekeeper. But then, unexpectedly, the house and all of its furnishings were put up for auction due to Reed's health, and she moved back to, quote, the swamplands of Florida at doctor's orders, and she disappears from newspaper records. When we first met Jack Thompson, when we were considering buying Chiles' house, Jack said there are 2 homes in Kenilworth that should be on the National Register, Chiles' house and the Annie J. Reed house. Let's hope that vision comes true someday. Greene left Asheville for Gastonia in 1952. I don't know if it was related, but in 1951, Ronald Greene offered up an astounding $2,000 reward for papers that had been stolen over time from his offices in the Jackson building. He noted that his office had been entered 5 times over the past 3 years, and while it had been reported to the authorities, no progress had been made. The police chief noted that no official report had been made other than one 2 years prior, and the officers state that Ronald Greene had called them off the search. Building drawings had been taken in at least one case, and Greene stated the thieves knew what they wanted exactly. They got in and they got out. In any case, in April of 1952, the opening of Greene's office in Gastonia was announced. Greene jumped right into his work in Gastonia, designing many important projects in the region. That includes the Methodist Church that you see displayed here, with both the original rendering and a photo as it exists today. He worked on the remodeling of the county courthouse, which, as you can see, got off schedule, and was granted the work to do an expansion of the courthouse, which is what he was working on at his death in 1961. Ironically, an article a few days after his death noted that the expansion work would not be delayed because of his death. Ronald Greene left behind an incredible architectural legacy that shapes Asheville, from its downtown to the historic districts of Grove Park, Chestnut Hill, and to the Kenilworth, Beaver Lake, and Lakeview neighborhoods. His works are listed individually on the National Register of Historic Places and as Asheville local landmarks.
A Southern Tourist magazine writer of 1926 wound up his interview with the architect thus: "And now, Mr. Greene," said I, "no doubt you came to Asheville for your health, did you not?" "Yes, I did not," replied Mr. Greene. "I came here because I like the mountains, and there was opportunity. There was absolutely nothing the matter with my health. And we're all the better off here in Asheville for it."
Thank you for joining us. We hope things get back